Hi, my name is Mike J. Quinn, and I'm the founder of AmericaUnited.org, a nonpartisan organization whose mission is to unite this country under the basic American rights of freedom, equality, opportunity, and security. I'm also the author of America Needs a Dream and Plan A. I've been studying the American political system for the past 10 years in an effort to unify my family with American citizenship so I can live with them without fear of being split up by my government. And I'm still working on it. This is not the only way in which my government has failed me. And the more I investigated what the barriers were to keeping my family together, the more Americans I saw had similar problems. And now it's my mission to make sure all Americans are treated equally and have the same access that all of America has to offer, no matter what minorities we Americans also belong to. Our Constitution and Bill of Rights were designed to create a fair and just government that protects the rights of citizens above all else. Today, our lawmakers discriminate against millions of Americans under the guise of states' rights. They claim states should be free to govern themselves and have a right to make their own laws. But when a few selfish people get into power, this strategy has become a convenient way to circumvent the protections we were promised under the Bill of Rights and has allowed the leadership of some states to persecute groups of people that they see as either unworthy or a threat to their grip on power. This is not a new strategy. In 1860, Southern states defended their right to have slavery against a federal government that threatened to end it. After the war was over, Jim Crow laws popped up in some states, creating laws that circumvented federal protections and persecuted minorities. A recent example of this states' rights abuse is seen in Alabama. The Constitution has deemed all people should be able to vote, and it is illegal to have a poll tax or impose a fee for voting. This is to ensure that even the poorest of Americans can participate in elections. You see, in the United States, voting is not a privilege, it's a right. The Republican Alabama legislature has found a way to keep poor black people who tend to vote as Democrats out of the ballot boxes by passing a law that requires everyone to have a photo ID in order to vote. Now, this is not a classic poll tax per se, but photo IDs cost money, so the outcome is the same. And many poor Southerners don't have driver's licenses, so they would need to purchase a state-issued photo ID to vote. To make this move look legitimate, this new law has been sold to the public as an anti-voter fraud law. Never mind that there's never been any evidence of voter fraud, let alone an epidemic that needed fixing by such a law. And if that weren't enough to keep the poor from voting, soon after this law was signed, the governor then closed many DMVs in areas where poor black people live in an effort to help reduce the budget deficit. Now poor black voters in Alabama must somehow travel for hours in order to get an ID they probably can't afford, just so they can vote, effectively erasing 150 years of progress for the rights of black Americans. Some states are creating their own laws in areas such as anti-LGBT, anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, and new discriminatory laws are popping up in state legislatures around our nation every day. This is happening in America, to Americans, right now, by people who think they know better than the millions of people who must live by those rules, as well as the Founding Fathers and the Supreme Court. So who is persecuting Americans, and how can we stop them? There are two groups of politicians: conservatives, the ones who like things the way they are and prefer a small local government, and liberals, the ones who are always seeking to expand the rights of Americans and think the federal government should be involved in most aspects of our laws and business practices. The very nature of their basic philosophies sets the stage for this conflict. Both conservative and liberal ideologies have valid points, and they should be able to balance each other out quite nicely. But in politics, there will always be a certain type of person who will try to figure out a way to get people to go along with something that benefits themselves the most while taking away the rights of others. This seems to be the guiding principle behind our most harmful laws. When reading the news and listening to the presidential debates, it becomes apparent that someone in the Republican Party has found a way to get their guys wound up in areas that divide our nation. It would be unfair to blame the Republican Party itself, but there are some very nasty people within that party that have risen to power and seek to push their own personal or ideological agenda. This agenda attacks minorities and weakens the rights of hundreds of millions of Americans, while giving themselves all the rights they desire. In order to see who specifically is doing this, we need to look at how this is happening, and then watch to see who is saying these divisive things and who is leading the charge. In order for a small group of people to gain control of a party or government, they would need the support from lots of normal people, or they wouldn't be able to get the votes needed to pass their laws. In order to accomplish this, these people began crafting their phrases in a more positive sounding term. Now, what are these coded rallying cries we need to be looking for? Instead of anti-gay rights, they gave us protection of the sanctity of marriage. Now, who isn't for the sanctity of marriage? Don't gay people want their marriage vows to mean something too? Giving LGBT people the right to marry doesn't harm straight marriages in the least bit. Anti-LGBT laws are made to reduce the rights and privileges of the LGBT community, while retaining these same rights for themselves. Also, instead of anti-abortion, they gave us pro-life. Now, who could be against life, right? But telling a woman she can't have a medical procedure when she may need it is reducing her rights as a free-thinking American citizen while retaining their own rights because they have theoretically chosen not to have abortions themselves. Recently, instead of anti-Black Lives Matter, they're giving us All Lives Matter. Well, of course all lives matter, but that obfuscates the issue. Blacks are currently being over-prosecuted and over-incarcerated. 1 in every 15 African American men are incarcerated in comparison to 1 in every 106 whites. Black Lives Matter is just saying black people should matter just as much as white people. This All Lives Matter reduces the rights and freedoms of blacks while retaining the superiority of rights and freedoms for whites. So why can't we just blame Republicans for all these whitewashed messages? Well, one of the strengths of the Republican Party is they walk in lockstep with each other. And if you don't say what the leadership says and believe what the leadership believes, you will be called a rhino or Republican in name only. This is a way they shame you and separate you from the rest of the pack. In Washington, being by yourself is the best way to lose your support and lose your next election. So while it may look like we are in a fight against the Republican Party, it is these rhinos, the very ones that are brave enough to stand up for what is right, that we need to support. To throw them under the bus along with the bad guys would be just as small-minded and discriminatory as the people we're wanting to stop. Let's take a look at liberals. Liberals have their own issues, different from the conservatives to be sure, but just as destructive to our society and contributing equally to the current gridlock in Congress. Liberals come in many shapes and sizes, and all have their pet issues. Black Lives Matter, LGBT, immigration, women's rights, save the whales, etc., which are all good things in their own right. But unlike the conservatives, liberals feel they only have so much love to spread around, so they pretty much stick to their one pet issue, effectively dividing themselves into small groups, making themselves easy targets for the conservatives who gang up on them by voting as one big block in order to get what they want. So a divided liberal agenda serves only a few people and allows the political elite in the conservative movement to strip the rights of the minorities, one community at a time. So when gays are being assaulted on the marriage equality bills, they get no support from the Black Lives Matter movement. And when the Black Lives Matter movement gets mandatory voter ID laws, the women's rights community doesn't run to help them. And when the women are fighting to get medical services they should have a constitutional right to, men go fishing. First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. That sounds relevant today, but it was actually written by Pastor Martin Niemöller after World War II. It represented millions of Germans who didn't believe in Nazism, but stood by silently and let it happen until they were powerless to do anything about it. This can happen to us. Yes, the United States of America. Germany, after all, was a modern, powerful country. Nobody thought a Hitler would ever happen to them. That idea was far from anyone's mind as being even remotely possible. They were a free, democratic society, but the seeds of hate had already been planted by previous regimes and small communities of people. Nobody thought much of these comments or minor protests at first. A Jewish shop being vandalized here, a family being beaten up and evicted there. Little things at first. Hitler seized on these ideas, over the course of a few years, fanned the little flames of hate, and these sentiments grew and carried him into power. For us, these rights violations have already been going on for years, and they seem to be picking up steam as we stand by and listen to the presidential debates. An insult here, a proposal there, violence to busloads of immigrant supporters there. We all need to stand up to the Republican troublemakers today before there is no one left to stand up against them. The sad thing is, if we really think about it, many of us belong to more than one minority and are persecuted on many different issues every day. We have transgender immigrants, black women, poor senior Latinos. What about a black gay atheist woman? It should be a crime in itself to persecute her on as many levels as she is in her own country by her own government. And if you think about it, she pays taxes for the privilege of being so hated. How can this be legal? How can we continue to stand by and let this happen to each other? Around the globe, other nations are standing up to their governments and demanding their rights. Egypt, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and others have taken a stand for freedom and equality, and they're calling it an Arab Spring. But we as Americans can't really have an American Spring because freedom and human rights are not new issues for us. We need to remove the barriers some have erected for us and reclaim the American rights so many of us have lost in the past few years. And we need to clean out the people in our government that created these barriers. We need an American Spring cleaning. So what would an American Spring cleaning look like? To begin with, let's end this stupid human rights fight. Let's end picking on Americans who, by very virtue of just being an American, deserve every right, every freedom, every opportunity, and every security any other American enjoys. Let's end that fight. It's a morally bankrupt argument anyway, and if history has taught us anything, we've been moving in the direction of freedom and liberty since our founding. Just look at slavery, the women's right to vote, abortion, civil rights, and the very fact that we left a dictator to become a self-governing country. Freedom and liberty is what defines us as a nation. It's gonna happen. Let's instead talk about what it would mean to rebuild the Republican Party and get Democrats to support each other. We need an ethical Republican Party, one that stands for a balanced budget, lower taxes, smaller government, the part of the Republican Party everyone can get behind. The ideas that conservatives understand is in the best interest of all Americans. And we need a strong Democratic Party, one that acts like a big family instead of selfish individuals. We need them to work together. Why can't the Democrats and Republicans be the yin and yang of our government and spell out what a new political environment would look like? Two strong parties, each keeping the other party honest. Neither party having the upper hand and both parties striving to give Americans the best, most people-centric government on this planet. All of us win. Democrats win. Republicans win. Citizens win. We all win. And the beautiful thing is, the moment this idea was put out there was the moment it became possible. Because our nation's history tells us that anything that can be dreamed up can be made to happen if you want it bad enough, work hard enough, and have enough public support. So what do you say? Can we take our nation into a new direction? Can we make America better than it's ever been before and not just great again, whatever the heck that was supposed to mean? How do we make this happen? We vote. Voting is more powerful than all the money the rich can put together to sell their candidates to us, because it's our votes that get them elected. If our lawmakers refuse to work together like they were elected to, we'll be forced to find someone else to fill their positions. And instead of being the American Spring cleaners, they'll be on the list of things needed to be cleaned. Americans don't like voting for people who only bicker and don't get anything done. We don't like fiscal cliffs. We don't like monthly threats about defunding this or that because they aren't getting things the way they want them. And we don't like scattered, selfish pet projects that never get anywhere and rarely become law. We have the same problems today we had 20 years ago. As a matter of fact, they're even worse. How many undocumented immigrants do we need to have in our country before we fix our broken immigration laws? How many young black Americans do we need to incarcerate for half their lives for non-violent crimes before we change our laws? The American Spring cleaning is here. So let's get to work making this the best nation in the world. If you would like to see this happen, join AmericaUnited.org right now. Tell your government you've had enough and you want them to serve you for a change. Tell your government that all rights belong to all Americans and they need to start working together to make this country the best nation on earth. Or they can just go home and learn what it feels like to stand in the unemployment lines themselves. We're sick and tired of our dysfunctional government. We want our freedoms back. Join AmericaUnited.org right now, because you know what kind of a country you'll get if you don't. Thank you.